am live once again. It's been so long. It's been definitely less than 24 hours since I was last live, but I had some time, so I figured I would pop on and talk about some random stuff that was kind of on my mind. So I'm going to post the link to Facebook now. All right, so that is posted. So yeah, as the title implies, I want to talk about a few random things that were sort of on my mind in regards to things from my childhood, things from my past, which I tend to not really think about my childhood or think about my past too much. I don't really dwell on it, and I've honestly forgotten forgotten most of it. Don't really remember that many things. But there's a couple things that do stand out and do actually have some emotional weight sometimes. And that is basically like, if I think about things that I regret or kind of feel bummed about, it's in general how I handled my sports performance a lot of the times. Or in general, I just didn't really believe in myself, and I didn't necessarily have strong models or good network around me to help sort that stuff out. And I remember I felt for most of my career in those times playing sports, which I guess I should list what I was talking about. So things that I was doing was like track, cross country, baseball, basketball, soccer, and then occasionally I'd play golf or street hockey, football, things like that. But my main sports were like track, cross country, baseball, basketball. And in general, I look back and I feel bummed because I feel like I could have done a lot more, and it could have perhaps been really successful and been good, but I didn't actually really believe in myself. And I didn't really apply myself in the way that I have to other things. So as I got older and in my 20s, I started actually wanting to get good at things and develop skill in things. And one of the first things was playing guitar, because I was terrible at it and I really wasn't very good at music. But then I developed this some kind of discipline that I can also get into. So I'll talk about these things in terms of sports and regrets and those themes, and then I'll share a few quotes that really changed my life and a few quotes that actually really put me on a different direction and completely changed the way I looked at myself and allowed me to actually create success and gain skill in areas. And I think this is useful to do because oftentimes people will ask me about these things, but I generally don't really keep these types of things in my RAM, so oftentimes I can't really talk about it. So while I'm thinking about it, basically this quote that I'm referencing is, I think it was from like Robert Anton Wilson, and he said something to the effect of, if you want to be something, then you just have to do it every day. If you want to be a miserable person, you just need to be miserable. Practice being miserable every day. If you want to be a happy person, an optimistic person, then you need to practice doing that every single day. And in many ways, that's what we are, is a collection of habits, a collection of conditioned responses. And then you take those and stretch them out over a long enough period of time. And that is ultimately what we believe our identity is, or we believe that that's actually who we are. So once I heard this quote of like, if you want to be something, do it every day, then I started applying myself into all these arenas that I wanted to learn about, different skills that I wanted to get good at, and things in my life that I just really wanted to change that I wasn't too satisfied about. And I really, in many ways, wish I would have gotten wise to that a bit earlier. And then the second quote is, what was it? It was basically like another variation on follow your bliss, I guess. But it was actually a bit more tangible and relatable, where it was like, I think it was some band that I was into at the time, and someone was asking them, like, how did you guys get into this? How do you decide what to do? How did you come together as a band? And they were just basically like, we just follow our interest, our excitement, and our passion. Like, if something really excites or interests, then we follow it. If it doesn't, then we don't. And once I heard that idea, I was like, oh, that actually makes sense. Because at that time, felt really lost and didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I had no real direction, no real purpose, no goals. I felt really depressed, really lost, really disconnected, really withdrawn, just generally unhappy and just completely in a really negative space. And this was, I think, after high school, within my first year of college. And I had been pretty angry, pretty depressed, pretty sad, pretty withdrawn, pretty emotionally fucked up for probably 8+ years at that point. For me, it had always been something that I can remember being a kid, being very shy in certain situations, being really withdrawn. And then it really started to get worse. I think probably 6th grade, whatever age I was at that point, and then just got worse and worse as I got older, and then was just a really negative thing. But once I heard this thing of like follow your passion or what interests you or excites you, I was like, oh, I can do that. Because no one at school or no one really had any solutions other than like, well, you just got to study something, you got to pick something, you got to get a job, you got to do these normal things. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do those things because you're not happy and you're miserable. So I'm already unhappy. So why do I want to do more of that? So when I heard this quote of, if you want to do something or be something, do it every day. And the second quote of just being guided by your interests, being guided by your passions and sort of what excites you. Those two things really opened a lot of doors and allowed me to make a lot of changes in a short space of time, and are things that I still hold as somewhat foundational aspects of my personality and the way I make decisions or live my life. But that definitely relates back because definitely sometimes I'll think back. I remember, times when I was playing basketball or, just basketball in particular, and actually all the sports. I noticed this thing as I look back where, for me, the whole thing was kind of about a feeling, or it was about a vibe, and it was not even really a technical thing. It was like if I had this particular feeling, then I almost couldn't be really stopped. It was almost like, at least to take basketball, for example, if I had this feeling, all the shots, I was pretty much going to make them with a high degree of accuracy. But if there was someone around me that I didn't like, or something of that nature, or like I didn't really like my coach, so I didn't feel comfortable, so I couldn't have that feeling. So I was always kind of like a little bit getting in my own way, and never really was able to feel comfortable and confident enough to actually step up and perform fully all the way. Except in a few instances when I can remember where, for whatever reason, I was like, this doesn't matter. Maybe it was like the game was an exhibition or the practice was something else. Basically, like, dropped the pressure and the fear and the anxiety, and then I was able to just have fun. And then my performance and skill level was nothing like what it was before. Like, for example, I remember, like, in those days, I think I was 5'8", and I could jump okay, but I wasn't like the greatest. But I remember there was a phase where I had a certain feeling, and if I had the feeling, I could jump and basically grab the rim, which, being 5'8", was cool at the time, especially being in like 9th or 10th grade. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I can do this. But it only lasted for like a month, and then I couldn't really find that feeling anymore. And And even in that time frame, if I didn't have that specific vibe or feeling inside of myself, then I couldn't do that. But if I could get that feeling, then I could do it. And it's just really weird thing that when I look back, and it's still that way, I still tend to function that way as an adult in many of the things that I'm doing. But I just have a deeper context of understanding from studying internal training, meditation, Neigong, and Tai Chi, things like that. Because a lot of times things with Neigong, things with Qigong, a lot of it is just kind of a feeling and a certain quality. Like, for example, where I'm at now, my mind can conduct through my channels to such a degree that if I put my mind through my arm, depending on the quality of strength of my mind, I can change the way the tissues feel in my mind, or I can change the way my tissues feel using my mind, for just saying my arms, for example, but in actuality, it's my whole body. But it's just allowing it to drop and soak through, and depending on the sensation or whatever intensity or thing I dial the mind, or what feeling that I have, it will change the quality of that. So it's just kind of funny looking back and thinking about how if I had the right vibe, whether it was a track meet or a cross country thing or a basketball, then everything I was able to do was dramatically and drastically different than what I could before. The problem is that I usually didn't have a good vibe because I was really angry at a lot of things. Maybe didn't really like my coaches. Maybe I was really angry or upset with my parents, or just being childish and adolescent and immature and taking it out on people around me. So it's just interesting looking at how these certain things can affect it. But I can now, as an adult, looking back, see certain potentials and things that already were inside of me in terms of like almost an obsessive nature, a nature to want to really improve something, really have some degree of mastery or some degree of strong aptitude that was maybe always there, but no one in my environment really had that attitude, really had that capacity, and didn't encourage it. Like, I think honestly, I was just surrounded by idiots most of my life. And it was only until I broke off and through the internet actually discovered more intelligent people, and I was like, oh, I understand kind of more what they're saying and how they're looking at things, more so than all these other nitwits and airheads that I've been surrounded around most of my life. Because generally one thing that people that are inferior do, or I'll just say inferior, because if I say stupid, then that just sounds kind of mean, but just basically inferior and insecure skill will always try to knock the other person down in some way, or emotionally manipulate them and make them feel like, try to get them to second guess themselves. Whereas you can be stupid, you can be less skilled, but if you actually have a degree of security, you can respect another person's achievement or another person's greater degree of aptitude. And if you're even more, I think, actualized, you can actually try to learn from that person or model their behavior or understand their thought process. But it's definitely the weakest and kind of the most inept and impotent type of individual that will try to put a stick in someone else's spokes if they are, more secure, or if they are more successful or more adept or more have a higher degree of aptitude in whatever that is, whether it's you hate rich people, or you hate people that are successful, or you do these types of tactics. Like recently, I was talking to a friend of mine, we're having a conversation, and this person decided to kind of go in a more passive-aggressive route where they're having a conversation, and their whole thing is just like, well, I think what you're saying is just like it's just like a expectation, so you're just creating it for yourself, which is kind of a low-level type of gaslighting, and it's a way of passive-aggressively trying to invalidate someone else's perspective. because it's not actually addressing what they're saying or what they mean or anything behind it, but it's just something that a weaker person will do to try to put a stick in the spokes of someone else. Which honestly, I'm not a fan of that type of behavior. I don't really tolerate it personally or professionally or in any real context, because I think it's one thing to perhaps not understand someone or not want to engage, which that's everyone's right to just be like, yeah, I don't care. I don't want to engage in this. Like, I'm out. That's your free right to choose as an individual. But I just think it's more empowering, and at least on a personal level, I I enjoy having people in my life that are way smarter than me, that are way more successful than me, that are way better than me at things, because then I can try to learn from what their example is, learn from their experiences. And in many ways, if you surround yourself with people that are smarter or more successful, in many ways it can kind of pull you forward, which is kind of a third thing that I kind of picked up on, I think, early on in my 20s. So the first was those two quotes. The first was like, if you want to be something, do it every day. The second was just following your passion, following your interest in what excites you. The third is basically surrounding yourself with the things that you want or you want to become. Things that are around you that can pull you forward. Because if like you're the most successful person in your friend group, you might need more friends. Nothing against your friends, but you just might need something else outside of that. It doesn't have to necessarily be a literal friend in real life. It could just be books or media or some way of studying with someone else that's more successful or adept at something. And also, it's just a way of kind of hacking your unconscious and subconscious functions. Because in many ways, our brain and our experience is just a product of whatever goes in. And the thing is like, basically we think we have this high degree of autonomy. Like, I'm a free thinker, I'm an independent thinker. But in reality, there's not really any such thing as an original thought or an original idea. And all of us are a lot more vanilla and reactionary and mechanical than I think we would like to admit to ourselves, which is not a put down. It's not a bad thing. It's just understanding the nature of what our experience is. And this is something that Eastern traditions studied for a long time and have known for a long time, that basically we're inherently mechanical beings in a lot of ways. And for some reason, the Western paradigm is really confused in trying to figure this out, and or they're really kind of depressive and nihilistic about the whole thing, which is, both are kind of incorrect in my opinion. But basically understanding this aspect of your mind and specifically choosing and putting in things that are more like what you want to become or where in the direction you want to go. An easy example of this is like, if you talk about just understanding or respecting someone else's opinion on something or in someone's source of information. Basically, unless someone has what you want or has been where you want to go or been through what you've been through, then generally their perspective or their opinion is largely irrelevant. Like for me on a personal level, there's very few people that I actually respect enough to really listen to and take to heart what they say. Obviously, I respect everyone enough in a general way as just a human being to treat them as kindly as I can and be respectful and listen and, those basic things. But to actually take to heart or seriously reflect on is very few people that I will actually entertain that in any way, shape, or form. Because generally, it's again, like I said, if they don't have what I want or have been where I want to go or been through what I'm going through, then it's not just not relevant in general. So it's like, if you want to learn to be financially secure and independent, you're probably not going to get that advice from the clerk at the grocery store. Maybe on a rare instance, but odds are that's not the person you're going to want to talk to. You're going to want to talk to someone who's actually done it. And they've actually done it. They understand how they did it. They can communicate about how they did it, and they can look at where you're at, understand your situation, your unique context, and help and explain to you and show you how you can do the same thing. That is something or someone that's worth respecting or worth listening to, in my opinion. So the point of that is choosing your sources of information, whether that's books, movies, music, courses, classes, these things that you're actually would be consuming. And many of the stuff you do have control over. You can control what you consume on a media basis to a large degree. So it's as simple as garbage in, garbage out. So it's just like, I don't know, you go to business school. Is your business teacher a millionaire? How many successful businesses have they built? Or are they just like a professional scholar? Like they're good at talking about it, but are they good at actually doing it? If they're not good at necessarily actually doing it, or at least coaching and advising successfully other people to do it and maybe have equity in companies or are advisors and consultants to actual successful companies, and otherwise their opinion seems to be somewhat theoretical. So it's just kind of a simple, obvious, somewhat common sense thing, but is highly relevant and useful to consider and reflect upon. And for some reason, the incense is just going straight into my face right now. You can see it wafting through. So someone asked earlier, what tea am I drinking right now? Basically, the tea I'm having right now is my Gynostemma and my honey chrysanthemums that I have available on HyperionHerbs.com. Just because it's a little bit later and I really don't feel like having any tea or caffeine or any additional stimulation, so I just wanted something to kind of be a bit more chill and mellow. And definitely you can gung fu brew the Gynostemma and the chrysanthemum like very strongly. Yeah, the Gynostemma is out of stock right now, but will be shipping to my fulfillment center tomorrow. So I'll be able to start shipping it out early next week. So I'll mark it back in stock probably tomorrow, I think. So definitely be on the lookout for that, because I highly, highly recommend it. Because you can gung fu brew it like quite a lot. Just a small amount with some honey chrysanthemum you can brew for a very long time and get a lot of tea out of. So I highly, highly recommend that. I'm just waiting for my water to heat up. I'm sorry if it's a bit loud. Let's see here. There we go. Yeah, so hopefully all the stuff that I was sharing earlier is somewhat helpful, because I definitely have not talked personally about things very much. I don't think in my career of being on the internet and talking about things, I haven't shared a lot of personal stuff. I mean, I have, but it wasn't explicitly me just talking about things in that way, which I'm happy to do to some degree, but also to other things. It's kind of like my personal life, and I don't really talk about it to the general audience. I'll talk about it in a one-on-one basis. What happened to the goji berries you had on Hyperion? Honestly, I just didn't feel like selling it anymore, because I liked the ones that I had a lot. They were really unique in some ways, but I feel like goji berries are just such a commodity, and they're so readily and easily available that to just siphon off cash flow and capital for it just didn't really seem that relevant or useful anymore. Just because honestly, my margins on it weren't much of anything at all. So it just was like kind of just, let's see what happens, or maybe it'll be cool. But honestly, the margins weren't that good, and it's something that's so easily and readily available across a lot of things, and the quality of pretty much most things is pretty similar. So I just don't really like products like that. I don't like products that have those criteria, meaning like pretty weak sauce margins, readily and easily available across a lot of other avenues, and I don't really have any type of real specific angle on it or any strong reason why it's good or better or different. So that's kind of why I quit selling it. Also, right now I'm drinking normal spring water, but then I put in 10 drops of the Vitality Detox drops, which are also, again, on HyperionHerbs.com. Highly recommend getting a bottle of those if you have not already. Just because the heavy metals and the environmental pollutants and the endocrine disrupting chemicals is a real deal. It's no joke. Like, for some reason in America, it's seen as not a real thing. And you get these kind of idiotic mainstream science people who are like, oh, toxins aren't a real thing. Detoxifying is not a real thing. Like, I saw a video last week where this lady is saying that you don't need to do detoxes and they're stupid and detox diets are dumb and there's no validity to any type of detox supplement or anything like that, because our body is already doing that all the time anyways, naturally, so there's no reason to do anything else. So it's like, well, your heart is already pumping, your blood's already moving, you're already breathing, so you don't need to exercise. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to do anything special to enhance or work with those capacity, because you're already doing it naturally. So don't even worry about it. It's like, well, no, that's not accurate, because we know that there is a ton of value in exercising and in keeping yourself strong. So it's just, that argument is pathetic. It's just honestly really not a good argument. However, I do agree with many of their critiques of a lot of those products, because a lot of the detox products are stupid, ineffective. A lot of people in that genre are really ungrounded, make no sense, like hardly can form coherent thought structures, and oftentimes can go into like doom, gloom, conspiracy theory type worldviews very, very, very quickly, which does not do anything to help the image or the reputation of the industry at large. However, this product is legit as they come. The results are legit and solid, and it's a super helpful thing to add in, I think, for quite a lot of people, which is why I decided to sell it in the first place, because it helped me out quite a lot just in my own life, and then letting my friends try it. It's just a solid product, and it just boggles my mind a little bit how people aren't really aware of the damages and the negative effects of heavy metals and all these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and they're ignoring the 270-page report put out by the World Health Organization correlating of the vast majority of modern diseases to these types of pollutants. But again, there's nothing to it. There's no science, there's no evidence. It's don't worry about it. Just go back to sleep. Like, all right. Did you have lion's mane today? I did, yeah. In my morning drink, which had a tablespoon of Dandy Blend, 2 scoops of collagen protein, a tablespoon of butter, and like a teaspoon of brain octane oil, and like 2 teaspoons of lion's mane. That was that morning drink, and it was really pretty good. What are your thoughts on turkey tail? I think it can be useful. Again, it has benefits for the immune system. To me, I feel like its benefits are kind of narrow. It definitely doesn't seem to pack the punch of reishi or cordyceps or chaga or lion's mane, because they have these immunosupportive properties and qualities, but a lot of other things that kind of branch out. So I really recommend those more so, and that's also why I've never really sold turkey tail. Also because at a certain point, let's say I sell turkey tail and those four other mushrooms. Let's say you're a consumer on the website. You're like, okay, which one should I buy? Which one's good for the immune system? All of them. Oh, well, which one should I get? Like, well, so it's like in some ways, those four cover so many bases that you don't necessarily require anything outside of that, in my opinion. Unless I want to get super dodgy and start talking about cancer and tumors and making really suspicious and illegal claims and conversations. Then we can get into agaricus mushroom, turkey tail, and some of the other ones that can have more alleged significant anti-cancer and anti-tumor properties, allegedly. But I don't really want to get into that world. It's not really my jam. Have you ever tried any of Crimson Lotus tea? If so, do you remember which one? I've tried some of their stuff. Some of my friends have hung out with the owners, and they're both really cool people. Their stuff's definitely good and good quality, but it doesn't really interest me, as I never got any real tea quality to any of their teas. I was never really that blown away or impressed, but the stuff I had, I would say, it was good. Like, it didn't make me feel bad or terrible or wonky. It was clean. It was good quality. You can tell they're really passionate about what they're doing, and they're just kind of solid, honest, and authentic individuals. I think I actually bought a teapot from them, though. I got a silver teapot through them many years ago. That's the extent of my experience. I pretty much just drink all my own stuff at this point. Do you ever dabble in political economy? What are your thoughts on private property given the operated business? It would be interesting to have your take from an Eastern philosophy perspective. Well, could you perhaps expand more about what you mean by that? Because Eastern philosophy is not against having personal property. It's not against individualism. It's not against having nice things or having economic abundance. That's a tremendous and massive misunderstanding, which has no basis in any of the teachings or any of the traditions. So many of their views would probably be just pretty common sense and natural. So if you can expand more on what you mean by that, perhaps I can shed more light. But if you're asking because you think Eastern philosophy is like, don't have things, there's no self, there's no property, that's not the case. And that's not what I think or believe. But I also haven't spent a long time thinking about it in terms of private property or political or economic aspects. But if you want to expand on it, I'll definitely share more if I can, if you have more specific questions. Do you drink alcohol? Not really. I mean, once every few months is what I would usually do. Honestly, the only time I drank and the only reason I started drinking is when I was doing online dating. I was just like meet up with people and go on a date, go to a bar, have a drink. But I don't really care for it. I think it's kind of a weak buzz. And just on a more restricted, specific program right now for the next 3 months. So I have to exclude alcohol and sugar and dial back my sexual activity and meat and all my addictions and stuff like that. I have to dial that all back to prepare for certain things. Let's see. Do you invest in the stock market? I have some mutual fund and like a retirement account, but my plan in the short, medium, and long term is to get more into investing and building more long-term economic wealth and sustainability through investments, whether that's real estate or things in the stock market. but I'm in no means an expert or highly educated on the subject. What are your thoughts on muscle testing for what foods and products are good or bad for a person? I know people are really into it, but I've never really gone down that rabbit hole, so I can't really speak to any degree of real authority or expertise on it. As many people as you say, as you can find who say it's real will say it's fake and nonsense, but none of the practitioners that I see use it, and none of my friends use it. I don't use it, so I'm not really hip. But if it works for you, then sure, I don't know. Thoughts on Alex Jones? Personally, not a fan. I don't think I just think he's kind of, as absurd as Fox News and that world is, he's just the other side of that coin, at least at this point, in terms of how people think about it and look at things. He's kind of just an exaggerated meme or exaggerated trope in some way. And he makes a huge like I watched an interview with him and Joe Rogan, and some of the, just watching him make these massive leaps where they're talking about something that someone said. So how quickly he took what this person said and was saying, like, they want to kill this, they want to kill that, they hate this, they hate that. I'm like, I don't know if you could really make that jump. Like, that's a big jump, and those are some big claims without any real evidence. But Joe Rogan was just, I don't know, high or just not that quick, and he didn't really catch it and was just kind of on that same train with them. And I was just like, these dudes are really intellectually lazy and pretty foggy in their thinking and in their claims. But that's kind of how he functions. And it's just kind of like, he just reminds me of Rush Limbaugh, but the other side of the coin. Not to say that he, on a personal level, he might be a really good person or might be a genuine person. I don't know. I don't know him on a personal basis. Just saying, like, if I watch his stuff, that's what I think and feel, and I have no real interest in it. And I think people like that lose context because they start to exist in an echo chamber. Like, he's talking about Joe Rogan's interview with the head of Twitter, the CEO of Twitter, I guess, and how the Twitter and Facebook and Google and YouTube and all these old left-leaning ultra-liberal companies, allegedly, according to these people, they exist in this hyper-liberal echo chamber. So they don't have any real context or communication or real contact with the rest of the world, so they lose perspective. And I think that happens to a lot of people, and is a very common human trait. Whether you're a religious fanatic or a, liberal, progressive, psychological, mental, whatever person, or you're a new age hippie, eventually what happens to everyone is they just exist in echo chambers through hyper normalization, and they're just surrounded by what they already think, what they already believe, and it's just constant validation and confirmation bias. And then you just get, if you stretch that out over a long enough period of time, you get way more rigid and fixed and fixated, and eventually you lose any capacity for perspective or real thought or flexibility. And it's pretty obvious, at least to me. You can just look at people's bodies, and it's all there. You can listen to people talk, and it's all there. It's really no one's fault. It's just, this is the milieu. I think that's the word. That's just the world we live in. So you get kind of accustomed to it, and it takes a lot of time and energy to perhaps break outside of that, which is kind of funny because people generally, they'll go into, let's say, the psychedelic world or like plant medicines, and they think they're breaking away from the matrix or breaking away from the consensus or the mainstream world, when literally I could almost write out word for word what their experiences will be and what they're going to say, just based on so many years of experience in that world. Like, there's been times where I've watched TV shows about these kinds of things, and I'll say pretty much word for word what the character's going to say long before they say it. Sometimes it's exactly word for word. Like, I remember one time I was watching this show about polyamory. It was called Married and Dating. And at a certain point, I could just say whatever that dude was going to say because it was so predictable and mechanical and robotic, because I understood his agenda and what he was working with internally. So at a certain point, it just becomes predictable. So in the same, what I'm saying is people get into the whole the psychedelic or plant medicine type world, think they're like becoming liberated or breaking away from all these things, which maybe they are to a certain degree, but ultimately they're just replacing it with another set of exactly what they left from, and then they get deep into another cult, deep into another echo chamber, and then it just repeats the same pattern, but it's a different side of the coin, so they think that it's actually different or an actual transformation or something deep and profound, when in actuality it becomes oftentimes just as trite and trivialized and mundane and boring and full of minutia as the thing that they were an alternative to before. So because that's not really the point nor the answer, and the approach is incorrect, but it's also part of life. You just have to go through these things, and we have to learn from our mistakes and make mistakes and grow and evolve as a person, hopefully. Thoughts on causes of depression and anxiety. I would say some of it is, it kind of depends. It can manifest as a lot of different ways. Perhaps dishonesty, inability to actually communicate and express yourself in a clear and authentic way, and then that weighs you down over a long enough period of time. And then there's a certain self-absorbed quality that can come along with those things, because you're just kind of in your head thinking about thinking, and you're removed from your experience, and you kind of, it's easy to go into a woe is me type thing where you can end up making your situation much worse, because part of it is the nature of emotions and feelings is they're pretty cyclical, they're pretty temporary in nature. But what happens is we grab or we fixate or we stick on one of them, and then identify with it, and then it becomes habitual, then it becomes addictive, then it becomes problematic. Versus if it's just a short-term thing, then that's fine. It just, you move through it and no big deal. That's just part of being healthy and a normal human being. But it's kind of a big, lofty subject, but those are some of the things that I would say. Those are things that I've dealt with and felt very intimately for very long periods of time in my life. So I quite understand exactly what they are and how they can manifest and how awful they are to feel and experience and to live through. How they can really undermine the quality of your life. So it's something I understand quite well. What type of Buddhism do you practice? None. But the things that I have been practicing and learning is from Chuanjian's school of Taoism, which basically includes Buddhism. Chuanjian means complete reality, so it means they just took in a bunch of Buddhism and Confucianism and mixed it with some Taoism, or what we might call Taoism. But so if there's any Buddhist stuff, it just comes from Chuanjian, complete reality. So yeah, but some of my teachers have Buddhist influence, so perhaps it can come through that way. But I wouldn't say that I practice Buddhism. Let's see. I guess what I meant to say is, do you think that the current system set in place alienate people from their own labor, being told what to do, how to do it, when to do things, etc., just to sustain a decent living? Does Eastern philosophy have any insight on the exploitive nature of capitalism? Would be interesting. I think the long and short of it is no. if people were to say Eastern philosophy is like communist, that is a huge error. It's not really any of those things. It's a bit more practical and pragmatic. To put it in context, from what I've heard from my teachers, the highest level practitioners that they've met are all multimillionaires, are all ultra wealthy and rich, and are not in temples. They're not monks. They're not poor. These are people on the level of probably enlightenment, on the level of immortality, high level. And then I personally know some people who are pretty far along in certain areas, and they are also financially very well off. So this idea that somehow Eastern philosophy is about being poor, or is like communist, or something against being anti-individual, is a misunderstanding, and a complete misunderstanding from the outside. Because the whole thing is very pragmatic and practical. Because ultimately, if you haven't sorted your life out and you don't have any money and you're worried about money, you're going to not be able to grow in a spiritual way very much at all. You're not going to be able to actually have the peace of mind and the focus to be able to invest in higher level practices and the arduous difficulties that will be required. So they believe if you can't sort out your life to a high enough degree, then you don't deserve access to higher teachings, is sort of what I've heard, let's say. So I think generally the way people understand Eastern philosophy is inherently incorrect and doesn't have really anything to do with what people are actually doing. It's just kind of a bit of a fantasy, is what I would say. Let's see. I think the resurgence of Marxism and communism is pretty nefarious and a negative thing. I think people are historically ignorant. They don't understand how things have played out over history, over long periods of time, under these types of regimes. And if you say that, people that are kind of dumb will then jump to the conclusion and say, oh, well, you must just think capitalism's the best and it's the savior and it's the perfect system. No, it's not what I'm saying at all, because that would be dumb. Obviously, it's not. Obviously, there are problems. Obviously, there is tragedy, there is exploitation, there is massive suffering in the world. That is pretty undeniable. And any type of ism could be have a lot more to do with the people behind it than the actual ism itself. Because if you look at history, it doesn't oftentimes matter what ism it is, because ultimately it comes down to whoever is pursuing power, and they're just saying whatever they have to say to manipulate and get people on board with their agenda, or not, or they'll just use pure brute force. So that's a little bit about what I think. But again, people don't understand Eastern traditions at all. So it's difficult sometimes to have any type of intelligent conversation, because people are operating in kind of a Disneyland Mickey Mouse level of understanding Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism. Let's see. Thoughts on the Hare Krishna movement? None. No thoughts. That's if you have a more specific question, perhaps, but I literally never think about it. I have never really thought about it, and I probably never will after this live stream. But actually, I do remember when I don't remember how many years ago this was, maybe like 2008. I taught yoga for a brief period of time, and I remember I taught at a major health or major hospital, some massive corporate yoga gig. I had to teach and fill in for someone. I taught it's like 40 people in this room, and there was one Indian dude. And I remember afterwards he came up to me and started talking, and he was of course very enthusiastic, very, you know, sort of trying to stroke my ego a little bit. Oh, you're so spiritual. Oh, I can tell you really take to this stuff. Oh, I can tell you're an old soul. So I'm like, all right, whatever. But he's like, yeah, man, I'd like to talk to you again. Like, what do you do? I was like, oh, well, I own this other business. You can stop by and check it out. You might like it. So he comes, stops about, and he's like, oh, you should, if you ever had real authentic Indian food, you should come over and like, I'll cook you some real Indian food. I'm like, man, that actually sounds nice. Like I don't think I've done that. So went over to his house, and then it all became clear. I was like, ah, shit, this dude's just trying to recruit me. Hence all the inflammatory type of, masturbatory language that he was giving me, and then the enthusiasm. And then, of course, before dinner, it's like you got to chant and we got to pray and we're going to do all this stuff for the guru. And I'm just like, I'm here, I'll be polite, but this is fucking lame. So then I ate the food, and then it's more, trying to recruit me. And I'm just like, man, I got to get out of here as soon as possible. This is ridiculous. So I left and never really spoke or talked to that guy again because it was pretty whack. But that's my one experience with Hare Krishnas and trying to be recruited. Tips for dark circles under eyes and general skin health beauty. I'm looking pretty burnt out these days. Dark circles under your eyes is, I think, adrenal kidney type things. So definitely laying off stimulants, going to bed early, sleeping, resting, generally decreasing the intensity of your mind, and your nervous system's probably operating at 10/10 all the time, and it's just wearing your system out. So that's what I would say in a general sense. Just basic things like not overtaxing yourself, probably cutting out on limiting masturbation to a degree, definitely, and getting more sleep and more rest can help, and it just takes time. How much of your daily life is in meditation, Qigong, and Tai Chi? How do you balance the herbs and teas in your life with your practice? It's funny, I actually just posted a video earlier about my daily routine. But as an aside, Alex Smith, I sent you an invoice for the tooth oil. So should see if you got that yet. Because I'm not seeing it show up, but I definitely sent it to you earlier today, so you could get the, okay, cool. Just because I have packed and shipped like, I don't know, 4 or 5 other bottles, and just want to get them all out tomorrow. So let me go back to your question. Yeah, so daily life, in terms of specific practice time, it's anywhere from 90 minutes to 4 hours or 5 hours, depending on the day or how I feel or what I'm going on. But usually minimum 90 minutes to 2 hours. Usually 2 hours, like 30 minutes will be kind of stretching, and then 90 minutes of straight up training or straight sitting. But I also will go to the gym for a half hour, do some cardio on an elliptical. I'll take a few walks a day. There's that, but then honestly, at this point, it's all day, every day. I'm constantly relaxing and thinking things, or just trying to maintain certain qualities of mind and keep my mind soaked through my body. So the separation between the practices is, over the years, gotten much smaller, to where they feel eerily similar sometimes. Because a lot of it is just quality of mind and focus and these certain things. But then in terms of how herbs and teas relate, I would say personally it's very helpful. And I usually have an herbal drink in the morning while I'm doing work and catching up on computer stuff. And then maybe I'll have another drink after I train, or I'll do some tea after I train before lunch. And then basically maybe do another herbal thing afterwards. But like right now I'm doing some Gynostemma and the honey chrysanthemum. I'm doing it kind of Gong Fu style in my Gaiwan. And so technically it'd be another herbal supportive thing, because I would have done some tea, but I just didn't really feel like having that. I wanted to change it up a bit, have something a bit more mellow. So hopefully that answers your question. Definitely my whole life revolves around training, though, to quite a large degree. I don't necessarily recommend it, but let's see, next question. Do you still do online dating? I found it's pretty vapid and toxic nowadays. I don't. I haven't done online dating since like September. So however long that has been, I don't really have an appetite for it, because in many ways it can just really remind me of some cynicism and these types of things. But definitely back in September when I was doing it, my experience was much more positive. The people I met, I generally had positive experiences and exchanges with. And I think a lot of it is just understanding that it's a tool. So it is however you use it. And I mapped out and did like a whole course on online dating, but I just haven't finished it or uploaded it yet. Basically sharing my strategies and what I learned to actually make it more enjoyable and beneficial. But a lot of it, if you just change your perspective to using it for self-growth and reflection, and working on honesty and transparency, then it can be more useful. But also at the end of the day, yeah, you are dealing with the system, you're dealing with people, so there's going to be a lot of empty nonsense. There's going to be a lot of vapid ridiculousness, because maybe that's just how people are, or how they're functioning in relationship to that, into that medium. So a lot of it is just kind of how you bring yourself to the table, how you present yourself, and having having a decent degree of marketing knowledge and information. It was really helpful on online dating. Let's just say that. But like social media and these other things, it kind of just depends on how you use it, depending on your approach. It depends on how you feel about it, and oftentimes what the outcome is. Next question is, why did you put Tongkat Ali in the same category as Yohimbe? From what I understand, Yohimbe has serious side effects, but I don't know any with Tongkat Ali. Am I missing something? I basically just did that because it can be strongly hormonal, and pretty aggressive in nature. Like I remember when I took Tongkat Ali, it gave me nosebleeds. So that's pretty strong. I was basically just making the point that it's not a tonic herb, it's not an adaptogen, it's not any of those things that people say. It literally is straight up what it is, which is kind of a steroidal plant herb thing. It's not Gynostemma, it's not reishi, it's not cordyceps. That was really just my main point, is making that distinction and sort of cautioning people, because so many people, I was just looking at a company's website today and they're under this hypnosis where thinking many of these types of herbs are actually tonic herbs, and they're just mixing and matching and just like, I know what we'll do. We'll put all of the stimulating herbs together in one formula. It's just the lowest form of herbalism and the lowest form of health philosophy. But this is sort of what people do, and I could list a dozen companies. No, I'm not talking about them in particular. Even if I was, I wouldn't say so, because I've never bashed any other companies directly, and I never would, because I just don't really operate like that. But no, that's not who I was talking about. I'm just talking about a general philosophy. This is how so many companies approach herbalism and health, is just using Dr. Google, and that's not a very refined approach. It's not very intelligent, and for the long term, I don't think it's going to prove to be very beneficial. Because to give people a short-term boost or some short-term effect is not difficult. It's really quite easy. But once you start getting into the medium and the long-term consequences, the medium and the long-term side effects, results, then it gets a little bit more different and a little bit trickier to ascertain, because there's plenty of herbs that'll give you that boost for a while. But do you have a wide enough breadth of understanding? Do you have enough years of experience? Do you have authentic enough teachers and access to a wisdom or a real clinical experience to understand some of the subtleties and nuances and details? These are deeper questions, because there's a certain principle, and it's kind of like it's almost like it's a delayed thing, where, like, if you exercise, for example, like, you go to the gym once, and then if you expect results, that's not really ever gonna happen. It's something you have to do, like, do it regularly for a month, and then that's gonna create an effect down the line. So many of these herbs that are stimulating or very potent or strong and can create effects in the short term, but what they're pushing down the line, what they're creating further on down the line, sometimes people are not aware of, especially if they're just like, I'm going to take all the herbs that do these things and throw them together. Like, literally, so many supplement companies, I see the ads on Facebook, and they're even like, oh, formulated by neuroscientists. I'm like, dude, they're not formulated by neuroscientists. Maybe the neuroscientists didn't know anything about supplements and they just went on Google. And literally all they did was herbs and supplements that do this. Okay, I'm going to use everything that comes up on that list. And then I'm going to figure out whatever they say that you need to take to get that effect. Okay, I'm going to do all of those of each of those ingredients and then put them all in the same pill. And that is like herbalism, and that's natural. It isn't. It's not really herbalism. It is, I guess, technically natural, but personally, it's not impressive. And it's kind of just sort of shows you don't really know what you're doing or really what you're talking about. Sure, maybe you're enthusiastic or passionate, but I just personally don't like those products. I don't really believe in them, and I don't really want to take them, and I'm not going to sell them. So that's why any of the formulas that I ever did sell were very specific, were very precise, very minimalistic. And yeah. So that's why I said that whole thing about Yohimbe and Tonkat Ali. It was a bit more of a nuanced perspective. How can you go a bit more into immortality? How do we live being immortal and still go in the shadows? I mean, it's not relevant. Like, none of us are immortal. None of us are close to being immortal. None of us are anywhere near anything relevant to that level of attainment. So it's not really anything to say about it. Are you watching the Peterson versus Zizek debate tomorrow? No, I've seen things about it, but I could probably only handle short clips of it before I'll get a headache and be extremely bored. But it's cool that it's happening and that it's getting such a wide net. Like, people are paying money, and it's a big deal about it. So that's cool to see. But I honestly don't really like. Peterson came to my town and did a talk, and I had tickets, but I left before it started because I just was like, I don't care, actually. Like, I don't want to sit here and listen to this person talk. And it also started late, and it was supposed to start at like 8, and it was like 8:20, 8:25, and it had not started yet. And I'm like, man, I'm trying to go to bed at like 9:30. I'm getting out of here. This is dumb. I just don't really care for the mental weight and the mental nonsense of it. It just doesn't really do anything for me. But I do respect their ability to perhaps be articulate and communicate and function at a high level of proficiency, a high level of clarity. So that's cool. But I'm not going to watch it, really. Maybe I'll catch some clips. But it's actually a good segue to the next question, which is thoughts about Jiddu Krishnamurti. Do you find any value of teachings at all? Honestly, the dude I'm sure was intelligent and maybe had something valuable at a certain point of time, but personally, I think it's super boring. It's just a waste of time. Like, you get far more better things, more relevant things done in the 6 hours you're going to spend listening to him talk. Like, to me, there's just nothing there. and I could never really get into it, and I never will because it's just really boring. And I don't know. I don't really consider myself an intellectual, maybe in the past, but I just have no real interest in doing that, because to me it's just kind of empty and lacking in substance. Thoughts on no fap? I think it can be useful, definitely for periods of time, but I think also people can take it for granted. Kind of just depends on what's behind it. Is it guilt and shame and addiction and hatred of your body and its desires and its drives and impulses? Is it coming from an inability to authentically connect with another person and have a healthy sexual relationship? If those things are true, then actually that's what needs to be dealt with. But yes, of course, stopping the addictive behavior can be useful, can be helpful, can be a step in the right direction, obviously. It just kind of depends on really what the greater situation and context is. But if you're going to try to start getting into like, oh, I'm building my Jing energy, I'm building my Ojas, I'm getting more spiritual, then you're delving into really deep levels of dishonesty and just flat out things that just aren't true. So then I would just, like Montauk Chia and all that nonsense, just stop. You're not going to move this energy through your spine. You're not going to absorb it through your brain. You're not going to convert it into anything. That's not true. But and the main point I'm trying to make is just if you can actually keep it honest to what it actually is that you're doing and why you're doing it, then that can be useful. It can actually be really effective. But once you start getting into realms of, oh, I'm holding my sacred magical energy and I'm going to breathe it up my spine and I'm going to enhance my brain and I'm going to do all these things, it's just not true. What type of stretching do you do? I do mostly dynamic stuff, pre-workout and PNF regularly. I don't really know. I don't really do passive, flaccid stretching. My stretching is definitely more engaged, but it's not really like PNF. I can't remember. There's like a certain name for it, but I can't remember what it is. But it's also with controlled articulated rotations with the joints. Honestly, the general idea is oftentimes you do what you're trying to become. So if you just want your whatever to be maybe more relaxed and that's it, then you can just do like a flappy, like relaxed, disengaged, flaccid stretch. But that's what you're training and that's what you're going to become. So it's kind of like with controlled articulated rotations, you're actually firing up all the tissues. You're actually getting your nervous system awake and on, and then can take your joint through more range of motion. So to me, that makes more sense. But I'm actually unsure and somewhat suspicious to the actual efficacy or practice of those modalities, because when I do them, I'm doing it through the experience of all of my prior internal training. So basically, I'm just doing what my pre-existing internal training is through the potential lens of whatever that other modality is. Whereas if someone's just doing the modality, they're probably doing it through the lens of being a desk jockey, being wound up in their hips and pelvis from just sitting all the time, and probably have like thoracic kyphosis, all types of postural distortions. So they're doing whatever they're doing through that lens, versus I don't have those. I've spent years working out of those things. So I'm doing it through a different lens. So it's hard for me to be like, oh yeah, this modality is great, because ultimately I built my body for a specific thing. So everything I do is through that thing. So I don't know if I'm actually doing that modality or if I'm just doing my existing level of internal skill. So it's, I guess, a bit confusing, but I don't know if that makes sense. What's your hobby other than YouTube? Training, working, tea, herbs, stuff with my friends, hiking, things of that nature. Studying people that are successful, getting into incense, getting into other herbs, things like that. What do you think of supplementing magnesium? I supplement magnesium on a regular basis. can't remember what it's called. It's if you look up MAG SRT, MAG SRT, if you look that up, that's the magnesium that I take orally, and it's pretty nice. That's the only one of the only ones that I would take orally because it doesn't like give you the shits. It doesn't have a laxative effect. Otherwise, you could just do topical transdermal magnesium with the magnesium chloride. That's also pretty effective. Next question. What do you think of the incel phenomena / people not having sex? I think in many ways this is a worldwide phenomena where if you look at, say, Japan and Korea, they're actually ahead of us in many ways in terms of development in the modern sort of Western paradigm. And their marriage rates, their reproductive rates, all these things are plummeting. And people are less interested in sex and less interested in reproducing and mating and pair bonding and all that stuff. And then you have places, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, where there's huge gender imbalances, where there might be way more women than men, or the women don't want the men. Or there's, like in China, there's the leftovers, or China and Taiwan, there's the leftovers, where women past a certain age, they're not wanted. So there's just tons of single successful women there. Ukraine and Russia, there's loads of single women there. So basically, I think a lot of the ways, it's just kind of happening all over the world. And part of it, I think, is like people's health is just not as good. There's a lot more stress on the nervous system. People are not really just not that healthy and vital anymore. And people in the world so mentally dominated that it kind of shreds people's nervous systems. Like, for example, if you think about two extremes, let's say rural India, where you have a guy who's working on the farm 12 hours a day, backbreaking manual labor, comes home, has sex with his wife, they have like 6 kids, no problem. But then you have the desk jockey, let's say in America, who, from all intents and purposes from the outside, his life's pretty stressful, pretty serene, but he spends 8 hours a day on the computer, comes home, just sexually does not work, it's not functional. And, vice versa, other examples for other parts of, for other genders. But basically just illustrating the point that these stresses on the nervous system shred the nervous system. People get more dull, more dim, less sensitive, more addicted to extremes. So, of course, sex is just going to go, because to me, I kind of view sex as like a surplus type of drive or desire, meaning your cup's pretty full, so it's overflowing, so your sex drive is going to be perhaps overflowing as well, versus once your health and vitality start to go down, your sex drive and interest really goes down, your ability to relate to the opposite sex goes down, your natural magnetism and potency and attractive capacity goes down, and you kind of just become homogenized. So I think across the world, people are probably getting more homogenized, which is basically kind of obvious because homogeny is becoming trendy and becoming normalized in many ways. And it's just sort of the way things are going and sort of what people seem to want. So I'm not interested in it. That's not what I want for myself. So I choose to live differently. But I don't, say that other people should or shouldn't do it. It's just part of probably where we're at in terms of culture and history. Best supplementation habits for toenail fungus. I think if you get Pau d'Arco tea and do a tea out of that, soak your foot in it, from what I've heard over the decade or over the last 10 years, to me that's like the best thing because it's super antifungal. Pau d'Arco, PAUD''ARCO. Get that tea, cook it, soak your foot in it, and I think that should kill the fungus from what I've heard. Next question. It was more questioning, how do people attain immortality Wouldn't they be in the eyes of the media and scientific research? Do they live secretly? Um, no. There are actual immortals living on the planet right now, people that are hundreds of years old, but they're not in the media. They don't give a shit about any of these things, and are things that basically just starts to get into a world that is so far outside of people's normal frame of reference that it's not worth talking about. It's not worth even getting into or bringing up because it's so far out there that it's pretty much gibberish. And it's like people don't really believe in it. They don't have any conception for it. So it's like, meh. But I will say, as a general rule of thumb, if someone's very popular, very in the world, very well known, odds are their level of attainment is either nothing or not very good at all, or they're a complete charlatan or living in a total straight up facade. There are very few people that are in the public arena that have any degree of real skill or attainment. Very few, like 3 or 4 that I can think of, and they're not well known, they're not popular, they're not with scientific communities, none of these things. Because it's basically like, it would be something to, like, if you took, I don't know, I guess one way is of putting it as pearls before swine. Like, these people are so advanced, so intelligent, so far outside of what the normal human life is, that from what I've heard, they really don't treat people very well, and they don't really have high regard or opinion for people, which you can see in some texts and you can see in some ancient things. It's not a good view, because in the term of evolution, like, we're all pretty low rung, let's say. So it's just, these people are not going to be interested or engaged in us whatsoever because the vibrational difference is so huge. That's, I guess, all I'll say about it, really. But yeah, if you want to hold on for a minute, I have to pee really bad because I've been sitting here drinking tea and water. So if you want to give me like 2 minutes, I'll be right back and answer all the rest of the questions. So sit tight, get yourself some water. I'll be back in like 2 minutes. I just take off my lapel mic. All right, I'm back. I should leave more often. It's like I leave and then more people show up. So I should experiment with how long I can go on and how long people will just like sit here and stare at the wall. Let's see. Anyways, let me check back in and see if what questions that I missed. You said you were using traction doing the cars. Were you using bands or just the intention of expanding through the joint capsule? Well, here's the general idea. It's again, like I said, you train what you want to become, right? And a lot of it depends on your degree and connection between your mind and your body, and for your mind to be able to manipulate your soft tissue structure. So if I want to, let's say I want to stretch my neck, I don't have to do that, because this is literally like doing nothing. I feel next to nothing. It actually kind of hurts to do, like, this is what people normally do. It really feels terrible, and I don't really want to do it. And it's obviously a little faster and jerkier than what you might do, but if you watch people stretch or do their joint movements, they're just kind of moving their joint, like, oh, I'm moving my shoulder. Okay, I mean, I guess it's better than nothing. So what I'm starting to say is what I want in my neck is more length and more space, and actually for my tissues to be fired up. So what I'll do is use my mind to go into my neck, and then I'll stretch the tissues of my head up. Now I already have a stretch. I have way more of a stretch than I did from when I did all those stupid movements. So if I have this stretch to where it's like, you can't really see my body that much, but everything's going and lifting up. Now I have this stretch and this engagement. So now if I move my head, it's a huge stretch on my whole neck down into my thoracic spine. Massive stretch. Let's say if I want to rotate this way, this is a huge stretch. But the stretch is inside my body because everything is actually on and working, because I'm using my mind to do that. So I don't have to move that much or do that much to actually get a good stretch. And then not only that, but now my neck is warmer. I got my blood moving just from the way I changed my mind to use my tissues. So that's the general idea. You can apply that anywhere in the body, even if it's your wrist. I could just go, look at me, guys. I'm doing a joint rotation. I read it's good for me. Wow, this is great. But if I actually engage the tissues of my wrist, and then now I do a joint rotation, it is like it's way more difficult. I don't know if you heard that, but my elbow and my wrist just popped and adjusted based on how I'm actually using my tissues while doing the joint rotation. But that's just putting my mind through there, getting the joint to open and expand, and then maintaining the length, maintaining the expansion, and then moving through that and not letting it go slack or flaccid, which is typically what people do. So then now, just from that few seconds, my elbow, my wrist popped and adjusted, and now they feel looser, and my hand feels warmer because I got more blood flowing. That's the general idea. You can do that for any joint in your body and any time when you're stretching, and it will make you really warm really quickly and make you not only more flexible and mobile, but stronger at the same time, because you become what you train, you become what you practice. I'm practicing and training expansion, length, and actually engagement and strength and tensile, not tension, not grabbing, holding, contracting, but actually some engagement and expansion, because your muscles or your tissues can expand out, or they can actually contract. So that's all I'll say about that. So hopefully it answers your question. Have you heard of the melt method? I've heard of it, but I never did it. I'm definitely a fan of, self-care, myofascial release type things like that. And I think it, can be really useful and helpful for people as well. And, but I think what I'm saying in terms of actually the engagement in the rotational movement, or the specific quality of engagement through stretching, that's actually better, because like I used to need myofascial release. I used to need massage. I used to need body work all the time because I would feel tension or tightness or pain. I don't need that stuff anymore. I don't get it done. And I used to get it every week because I really needed it. Or like if I went and I flew, I sat on a plane for 12 hours, which I've done many times. Back in the day, it would wreck me. I'd feel so tight. I'd feel, and I need to stretch. I need to do all these things. Now it's really not that big of a deal. Obviously, yeah, I feel a little bit wonky because you're just sitting in the same place for 12 hours, but I don't have the tightness or the pain or any of those other things. Or if I do feel it, I can usually knock it out and get rid of it within a couple minutes. So it's definitely a very useful, very empowering skill to learn. For example, I had really bad knee pain for a couple years, just from errors that I was making in my training and a few other things, and it just sucked. My knees hurt all the time, hurt to get up, it hurt to walk up steps. Like, it just was not a good scene. I don't wish that on anyone. But using these things, along with correcting some of my other errors, made a huge difference. My knees feel way better and don't really have pain, don't really notice it anymore. So definitely made a huge improvement. Oh, yeah, I mean, definitely connective tissue hydration is very important. So obviously I'm speaking in somewhat general terms because I haven't gone super deep into that modality, but it sounds cool and it's definitely a step in the right direction, I think. Absolutely. And I think more people need some education on their tissue quality and getting actual hydration and tensile strength in their soft tissues, not just building muscles or going hyperflaccid like people like to do. Not gonna lie, after looking further into Jordan Peterson, I've come to realize that he really misunderstands a lot of what postmodernism is and tends to be quite vague in his lectures. I don't agree with that, but I also don't fully, like, that's a pretty vague thing in and of itself. Like, what do you mean specifically that he misunderstands? What is he not getting that they are putting forth? So please expand upon what you're saying in that regard. I'm curious to understand. Did you regret taking hemp in your early 20s, or are you more control and less vulnerable since you stopped your usage? I don't regret smoking weed back in the day. It was what I needed to do at the time. So I don't regret it, but I don't have any interest or appetite to repeat that anymore. And I realized it was just what I needed to do at that time, and that's pretty much it. I have no interest in it or an interest in getting high. Can you suggest anything for a female like myself who cannot seem to pack any weight in my feminine areas? I seem to be pretty aggressive as well and feel pretty manly. I can think of a few things maybe, but I don't really want to get into it on this live stream because it seems like kind of a personal type situation and a kind of a delicate arena. So if you want to send me a message privately, we can dialogue more about it, and I can understand more about what you mean. But I will say, in a general sense, sometimes it's just that's how you're wired. Like, that's just what you inherited from your genetics, and that's just case closed. Sometimes, however, from what I've seen in a lot of women, which I'll say there's this archetype that I call the flaccid spaghetti noodle, or the wet spaghetti noodle. It's a very specific body type that's pretty common in yoga communities that I've seen a lot, where women eventually they get into it so far deep enough where eventually their body again just becomes like this, becomes like kind of a spaghetti noodle. There's no shape here, there's no shape here, there's no shape this way. It's just sort of like boom. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, right or wrong, or any aggressive gender statements. I'm just saying that I notice this tendency with women who get deep into yoga after a long period of time, or women in general that become very blood and chi deficient, and are just really seriously lacking in vitality, and usually have digestive issues, issues with their menstrual system, menstrual, not system, but cycle, and some real digestive issues. And it becomes problematic because if you're around people that are really sick, then do you think that's normal? But then if you're sick for a long period of time, you think that's normal? You forget what it is to actually have vitality and strength. And then plus with all of the sort of propaganda and stuff in the media, it's an even more confusing time, which is why it's a little bit dodgy for me to even answer the question in an overtly way. But it's definitely a trend that I've seen quite a lot for men and women, actually, because I think in general, a lot of people's hormonal vitality is drastically sinking, and there's a great emphasis on homogeny and just, yeah, people don't want individuality, they don't want power, they don't want vitality, they don't want autonomy, they don't want sovereignty. They kind of just want to be homogenous, kind of just blend in and kind of be this sort of blob where you don't want to offend anyone, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings because that's bad. But it's like, dude, how boring is that? Like, how weak are people that they can't handle these basic things, such as people having opinions or strength, power, vitality, whatever. Now, these are big statements, I understand, but like I said, if you want to talk more about this specifically, I recommend it doing in private, because it is a good question, absolutely. Hey, Brandon, what do you think about psychedelics used in a respectful way? Depends on what you mean by respectful, and then depends on, because, for example, where I'm at, there's people who are doing ayahuasca once a month or every weekend. They're doing the frog stuff on a regular basis, and in their minds, that's respectful. In their minds, that's sacred. But I don't really agree. I think that's actually abusive. So it kind of depends on what your whole definition is, and what your intention is, what your setting is, what your goals are, and which psychedelics in particular. Like, there's a lot of variables at play. Do you enjoy bee pollen or pine pollen at all? No, not really. I don't really mess with those. But I mean, pine pollen or bee pollen sounds pretty good sometimes, but I don't really mess with pine pollen anymore. I definitely did back in the day. Let's see. Any other principles from this physical practice component, internal arts, you feel like people could apply to other disciplines? I like kettlebell training because of the emphasis on movement quality and inhabiting the body. Seems to have a martial arts influences. Kettlebell might have external martial art influences, maybe, I guess. I don't know. But if we're talking internal arts, there is no emphasis. There is no kettlebell. There's no weightlifting. There's none of those things. If you ever hear people say using internal arts means moving the body in the most efficient way, that's not true, actually. Moving through internal mechanics is the least efficient way to use your body. The most efficient way to use your body is just the way people use their bodies, which is, levers, pulleys, contract, expand, joint mechanics. That's the most efficient way to use the body, because that's just how people function. To function according to internal mechanics is not efficient at all whatsoever, and it's not accessible to the vast majority of people, and basically, like, it takes a long time to even get to the point to where anything that you could be doing could be called internal. But I would say the vast majority of people that are doing internal arts, they don't know what that even means, and they're not actually doing anything internal. You can I can watch them move for 5 seconds and know exactly what they're doing, what they're training, what they're not training, where they're coming from, regardless. And I will tell you that very, 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 very few people I've ever seen are actually doing anything internal at all. or can even tell you what that even means, or even know the process of going through that, because you have to convert your body over to that, because it's not natural, it's not efficient, it's unnatural and inefficient. So it's a pretty profound misunderstanding of terminology, I would say. Do you use carrier oil for essential oils like castor or coconut? It depends on the oil. Some you definitely want to use a carrier, depending on if you're using it topically or using it internally. But for most, it's definitely recommended because essential oils can be really strong and really potent. So I prefer fractionated coconut oil because it doesn't have odor or greasiness, or like jojoba oil. What are your thoughts on stem cells for healing specific lingering injuries? Personally, I've never really researched it. I've never gone into it. It doesn't really interest me. But perhaps it's interesting for other people who are more minded in that way. To me, I'm just not really. This is not my thing, so I don't really have much to say about it. But I do have to get going momentarily because it's getting kind of late. I got things that I have to do, and I need to eat some dinner before it gets too late as well. So I'm going to answer the last few questions. Thoughts on aggressive music like hardcore metal or gangster rap? Do you think it's often unbalancing for people? I think it can actually be balancing and cathartic for people who are on that frequency, because those types of music basically come out of someone's feeling and emotion. So if you're on that emotion feeling, and listening to someone else can be cathartic, it can be communal, it can be like give you a sense of connection and meaning and purpose and all these things, which is why people do it. And then sometimes they're expressing real things from life. If we're talking about gangster rap or whatever, sometimes it's like that's legit their life. This is real things that happened, or other things of art. So it's not really saying that it's like toxic or bad for people. It's kind of just, it is what it is. But if you're trying to cultivate something in specific, if you're trying to quiet your emotional mind, then yeah, those things are probably not the best idea. And so it's not really a question of is it good or bad. It's kind of like, well, it has these effects, it has these qualities. Is that the vibe you're on or not? If that's the vibe you're on, then it's actually great. If you're trying to go on a different vibe, then it's not great. Let me see. What do you think about retention of semen for long periods of time? Is it healthy to release semen like once a week? Yeah, I mean, long periods of time is generally not healthy. And even within traditions, it's not generally recommended unless you are a full-on monk, a full-on renunciate. And I don't mean like, oh, I'm an urban monk. Oh, I have that philosophy. I know, I mean, you literally get rid of your identity, you get rid of your gender, you cut off all ties from your family, you literally renounce literally everything. And then at that point, you would renounce your sexuality, and probably that would just be the end of it. But that's not what people were doing. So it's generally not really recommended. And it's, yeah. But I mean, yeah, modulating and being moderate with your sexual activity, that makes sense. Not being addicted to internet porn, that makes sense. Not doing it to an extreme, that makes sense. So, yeah. Okay, so to clarify, when I say postmodernism, I mean various philosophers that are labeled as postmodernists, such as Derrida and Foucault, to name two. He conflates their work with that of disguising Marxism. However you look at their work, they actually disagree to the very things that Marxism, what it is, what actually hard to write out, 200 character limit. I could link you some vids, etc. I think, yeah, I mean, that just goes down into I think, a more sort of irrelevant philosophical discussion, because Peterson, as I understand it, is not really, like, honestly, I think it doesn't matter what those philosophers thought or meant, because the people that are like protesting him or giving him shit, they're not quoting those philosophers generally. They're inherited sort of Marxist ideas from weak-ass professors at universities, or through just sort of popular media, and they're having this basically the general idea that all these things in life can be explained through, oh, it's the struggle, the power struggle, the class struggle, the gender struggle, all these imbalances. That's why things are wrong. I think generally that's more so the functional relevant point of what people are arguing about, because like people that are protesting him because he didn't want to for it because of his whole C16 scandal. The people protesting and get upset about that. They're not like, you don't understand the thoughts of Derrida and Foucault, and you're mislabeling them. That's not what they were saying. That's not what they're arguing. Like literally none of them are on that level. They're arguing something totally different from a different level, from a different perspective, and I think more so that's what's problematic, at least to my understanding, and also more relevant because I've never seen a Jordan Peterson article or protest or any social justice warrior type thing where they're quoting any of the philosophers that you're talking about or having any type of philosophical, concise, clear argument. It's ideology, it's dogma, it's emotionally driven, immature, adolescent behavior, and really simplistic type of thinking. To me, that seems more what's actually happening. But I understand what you mean, and perhaps what you're saying is true. Perhaps he is misunderstanding or mislabeling these old dead philosophers that probably literally no one has ever heard of. But I just don't see if it's necessarily a valid critique or criticism to say like, oh, Peterson's getting all these things wrong. It's like, I mean, maybe, but I'm also not really defending JP because I don't really care. I don't have a I don't have a dog in that fight. I think I enjoy certain valuable aspects of what he does. Very few of which is actually like a belief or a perspective or opinion. It's mostly just his ability to be articulate and communicate. That's to me what's valuable and interesting on a personal level. However, I do kind of live in a bit of a bubble and a bit of my own world, and I can see how these issues could be more relevant and important to people. But then I think also at the end of the day, we have to ask certain things like, so what? Certain things like, who cares? And other things like, how relevant is this to my actual life? What difference will this actually make if I'm going to invest all this time and energy thinking about it, worrying about it, analyzing it? What is the tangible outcome? What is the actual benefit? And is that worth it? Or is it just intellectual hamster wheeling? Which to me, I don't really have any interest in, because I want a pragmatic, tangible outcome and a benefit for that time and energy, which is why I also don't consider myself an intellectual, because it's things I'm interested in mostly are just functional, and it's always changing based on where I'm at in a specific linear process, which I don't necessarily recommend or or say is a right thing to do, but it's just my bias, let's say. So anyways, but I appreciate you bringing that up and offering something a bit more substantial and more well thought out than some of the other questions. Like, do you like Burger King? What do you think of that? It's like, really? And actually, someone gave me questions on Facebook the other day, and they were throwing shade at a lot of the questions on the live streams. They were like, yeah, a lot of the questions on the live stream seem poorly researched, let's say. And I'm like, damn, dude, roasting people on the live stream. That's messed up. So yeah, but anyways, I do appreciate that question. I appreciate all the questions, and for everyone tuning in and listening to the last almost 2 hours of a live stream. But it's getting late here, so I needed to get off here and have some dinner and get my life in order. So thanks again for tuning in. Remember to check out HyperionHerbs.com. I definitely recommend getting the zeolite drops 100%. I talked about that earlier in the video. This podcast, I was drinking Gynostemma tea with snow honey chrysanthemums that are on HyperionHerbs.com. Great adaptogenic, calming, balancing tea. So And it's still brewing. I've been brewing this for like almost 2 hours and it's still strong. Like, so value for money, it's pretty crazy. It's still delicious. But anyways, thanks again for all the questions. Stay tuned. I'll be doing more live streams, posting more videos, all that good stuff.